Hello everybody, my name's Novi and welcome back to the channel. The wrestling community encompasses so many different kinds of people who watch in so many different ways. Some stick to one company, some stick to their favorite shows, some stick to the past, and others try to watch everything. I can't say for certain which way is best. I have my preferences and others have theirs. But what I can say is that there's a sentiment that's been brewing amongst all of these fans for quite some time. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that bubble burst last week with this tweet that reads, "The new generation will always be better than its predecessor. This shouldn't be a hot take, but wrestling fans are always stuck in the past." Now on the surface, this tweet seems relatively innocent, albeit a little aggressive and lacking a lot of nuance. It's an attitude that many people have, and it's not just the younger crowds who have it, even people like Dave Meltzer, who, despite all the rating stuff and things like that, is an incredible wrestling historian, and he has this take. And I feel like this opinion exists because realistically, the in-ring today is at a higher level across the board than generations before. Up and down cards, you won't see as many horrifically bad matches as you would have seen previously. But to me, that doesn't mean wrestling is widely better. And when you ask if it is better, you have to add the layers of nuance that that question requires. Then when you do that, it really makes you think. I said earlier that there's been a sentiment brewing amongst some fans that's finally burst. And what I meant was, while wrestling may be in a good place now in a lot of ways, the future of the industry looks kind of scary. And today, I want to get into exactly why people feel this way, why I kind of agree with them, and how we can improve things moving forward. Now, before we dive into a topic like this, I want to make a few things very clear. One, I enjoy wrestling right now quite a bit all over the world. Two, this isn't me being a doomer about the industry. It's just me pointing out some things that I'm worried about. And three, the fact that more and more wrestlers nowadays are getting paid what they deserve, and the fact that wrestlers seem to be healthier than they ever have been before, is a great thing and absolutely should be celebrated. This conversation requires a lot of nuance, but I wanted to make those things clear right away so that nobody gets the wrong idea. With that said though, lock in, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk some graps like we always do. What I think we have to bring up first is what's essential to this conversation entirely, and it's how homogenized wrestling as a whole seems to be these days. Whether it's in the US, Japan, Europe, or anywhere else, nobody is trying to be different. Nobody is trying to lay their own path, build something that is truly theirs. Instead, in most cases, they're trying to follow the market leader in WWE, which is something that's only started happening within the last few years because now the WWE is widely popular. And whether it should be the case or not, widely a babyface promotion. Ibou, who we'll be talking to a bit later, said something about this that I agree with, and it's that WWE getting good again was bad for wrestling. Now, I know what kind of reaction that may cause. Put down the pitchforks. It wasn't a statement made because Ibou is a dub soldier, and I'm not co-signing it because I'm a Fed batter. That's not the case at all. What he means here is that it's an issue because when the WWE is good, it means all the industry trends are being set by the WWE. I mentioned homogenization earlier, and I think this is the root of that issue. Everyone is trying to be the WWE, trying to tell stories, cultivate fans like the WWE, because, like I said, as a company, they're the most successful right now. In theory, that makes sense and wouldn't be a bad way to do things, in theory. We see food brands, for example, copy market trends all the time. When zero sugar soda options became widely popular, everyone started to make a zero sugar soda option, which netted them a lot of money. Problem is, while that may work in an industry like food, copying other brands and market trends solely isn't how you cultivate an audience in entertainment. Sure, taking certain things from other brands or other projects can be a good idea, but there is a fine line, and as soon as you cross that line, things start to go bad. Simply because at the end of the day, you'll never build a core fan base by trying to be someone else. And it's an issue that AEW are running into right now. Far too much of their product seems to be catered towards the WWE fan, which is strange because at their most popular, they were uniquely their own. But like a bunch of other brands over this time, they got captured by the WWE's popularity post-Vince and started to engage in this fruitless pursuit, which is done nothing but alienate their audience week by week, providing an ideal breeding ground for their drop-off over the last few years. Obviously, this isn't the sole reason for it. There are plenty of things that we can point to, but just because it isn't the sole thing doesn't mean that it can't be the main thing, and it definitely is. Once you stop trying to be different, trying to be a unique entity, people stop watching, which is something that rings true everywhere in media, whether it's video games or music. But if you're looking for another example in wrestling, just look at the state of the indies right now. Back when the WWE was very bad and very unwatchable, they didn't set any of the market trends, because who would want to follow something that isn't working? So in turn, companies like Lucha Underground, ROH, PWG, CZW, all had their own individual way of doing things. They each had a product that catered to a certain fan base, and they all did well relative to each other because of it. That made for a much healthier wrestling world, especially as a fan, because then you could pick and choose what was for you and what wasn't. You had real options to choose from, no matter what kind of wrestling you were looking for. But again, with the WWE being good again now, they've homogenized it all. Whether it's in presentation, creativity, atmosphere, whatever you want to say, nobody is doing anything stylistically different, which makes none of these modern day big time indie promotions feel can't miss. We can look at the weekend before last as a great example, when there was Royal Quest, Maple Leaf Pro, DPW, and Rev Pro all on. And while I enjoyed particular parts of each of those shows, especially DPW, which I was there for, I vlogged it, you can check it out on the channel. What about any of that in its entirety is can't miss? Were there any parts of those shows that felt like they were trying to bring some new ideas to the table? My answer to both of those questions are nothing and no, and it's one of the biggest issues with modern wrestling nowadays. Maple Leaf Pro, for example, wasn't this exciting new company we all thought it'd be. It just turned out to be TNA, but in Canada. And that's so disheartening. Independent wrestling is so important to this business. It has been since its inception. And right now, as we've gone over it, we can see it's in a pretty dire place right now. And the horizon doesn't look to be any better with the announcement of the WWE ID system, which, to be clear, could end up being a lot of different things. But I remember what happened to the UK indies. I'm not saying it'll happen here, but if you don't keep an eye on history, you're doomed to repeat it. And for me personally, I worry about this big issue of homogenization getting even worse. Thing is though, I wouldn't say that these issues are all due to the WWE being good either. It's also in part due to how people themselves consume media. This tweet by Hida Owin describes this perfectly by saying, "I think it's a wider problem in wrestling. The mainstream used to mine the counterculture indie projects for new ideas, and they were propped up by the dedicated fans. Now the fans all follow the largest brand they can and shun the indie projects. It's killing innovation." We see this everywhere nowadays. People want to support the biggest, most popular thing because doing anything less is looked down upon. There's no reward for propping up indie projects in terms of numbers or anything like that. So broadly, people just don't anymore. And so in wrestling specifically, these indie projects just pretend to be the biggest, most popular thing in order to get people to come. And yet, they never really will. It's a never-ending rat race, and it feels like everyone is competing. Additionally, because of the way that the WWE presents their product, they've been cultivating a different kind of fan as the market leader. Nowadays, there's a large portion of fans that watch and get into wrestling for vastly different reasons than they did before. We can see exactly how things have changed just by looking at how many threads there are about this Liv Dom Rhea storyline and how it's basically turned into a detective board situation, or by the fact that this video exists and is real and you can watch it. Now look, like I said at the very top of this video, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's a right and wrong way to watch wrestling. At the end of the day, you get what you want to get out of it. But I can at least point out that there's a lot of fans nowadays that watch for this kind of thing before the wrestling, which feels scary to me because the market leader cultivating these fans means it could start to happen across the board. Or in other words, exactly what we talked about earlier. Although what I will say is that it's not something we've seen so far necessarily, so it's not something I'm immediately worried about or that I have specific examples for, but it is something I worry about when it comes to the future, because that's when we'll really start to see its effect. So I thought I'd mention it. Another thing I want to mention when it comes to wrestling fans too is how they've decided wrestling is to be discussed. And yet another tweet by Ibou puts this in perspective perfectly when he says, "Nobody just lets things be cool. Everybody's brain broken. Everything is a gotcha. Everything is, imagine the discourse if AEW WWE did that. Everything is reverse obtusity. How do you guys interact with the medium like this?" This is stuff that I'm sure we all see every single day. And me personally, I find it all to be so boring and so harmful to wrestling as a whole. Given the state of the internet right now, I don't think it's gonna stop. But wrestling really needs it to. There needs to be a place where people can actually engage and actually discuss this stuff online. And if it all stays like this, if it all stays awful, people that are genuine and genuinely care about wrestling will just stop interacting with it. And I personally don't want to lose some of the accounts we have in the IWC because there's some great people out there. Now, there's one last point I want to touch on before we get into how we can fix things with Ibou, and it's the wrestlers themselves. Because at the end of the day, that is the thing that defines this medium. And it's another aspect of the future that scares me a little bit. I think currently, wrestlers are struggling to stand out, both in presentation and style. Whether that's due to everyone trying to please Dave Meltzer and his rating system, or just the existence of two major companies again, is up for debate. I think both contribute to this issue. I don't know how equally, but they both do. But the issue still remains, and it's that nobody feels unique anymore. We talked about this concept a lot in terms of the companies earlier, so I won't talk about it too much. The same things apply, but the wrestlers themselves do have that same issue. When nobody is innovating, nobody is evolving in any meaningful way, how could it ever feel critical to consume any of the stuff not from the big two anymore in the US specifically? And then when it comes to the big two even, what will things look like when AJ Styles, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Roderick Strong, CM Punk, and all those guys call it a day? There are some names out there that I do feel are ready, but even they have their issues sometimes. Luckily, there is a saving grace because women's wrestling all over the world is in a fantastic place on this front. And that eases my fears a little bit. But on men's wrestling specifically, this feels like something I had to mention. If not just to ease my fears, but to also cover all of my bases before we get into some solutions. After all of that, which could be considered dooming a little bit, I don't think so. I think I was, being realistic, but either way, it's time to get positive. It's time to look forward to some real directions for improvement on all of these fronts. For this, as I've alluded to all throughout this video, I decided to bring on Ibou, primarily of WrestlePurist fame, to take us through his thoughts on how we could build a brighter wrestling future. Now, I'm gonna let my interview with Ibou run, and at the end, I'll give some closing thoughts on all this. So now, interview Novi. Take it away. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Ibou of WrestlePurist. First, Ibou, how's it going?
I'm good, man. I'm doing all right. The Yankees are getting their butts kicked, and the Knicks lost today, the day of this recording. But I'll be all right, man. I'm doing all right. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. It's a brutal day for New York sports, but it's a day to ask you a question here. So, last week, you went on a series of tweets. You made a series of tweets specifically about how WWE getting good again was bad for wrestling in terms of homogenization, how they set the industry trends, and the lack of innovation. And I agree with that. As folks have seen, as they've watched this video, they've seen that I agree with that. But I wanted to bring you on here because you were the person who made those tweets and inspired this video, how you thought maybe we could solve some of those issues, if we can even solve those issues. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, one thing that could help hugely is if promoters from these promotions that aren't running, like maybe the bigger ones. So this
Mhm.
is like for this part of the what I'm discussing, you have to exclude AEW and WWE, right?
Mhm.
And even though it could apply to AEW a little bit, but I think that these promoters, when they put on their shows, I think it would really benefit if they, within themselves and internally within the promotions, real like decided what they actually are doing,
Mhm.
in the sense of what is our identity going to be? Because I honestly think, as simple of a question as this is, I honestly think that a lot of these independent promotions, for example, aren't thinking that deeply about it. I think it's just it's modern wrestling. Let's get good wrestlers, and we're gonna have some good wrestling matches, and we'll promote with the guys that we can that can draw, and like
Mhm.
that's fine in a vacuum. But it would really help if these promoters like thought about trying to come off distinct visually,
Mhm.
presentation wise, and just with how their product comes off. Uh, I know I made it a part of the notable rant that I made. I was kind of going off on DPW specifically, which
Yeah.
I felt a little bad about, but I'll give them this credit. Like the way the show is shot and like the filters and like the color scheme and all that stuff, that's distinct if nothing else.
Mhm.
And that's something that at least sets them apart from some other indies. So much so to the point where when someone mentions DPW, I can visualize DPW like how the show looks visually. I can visualize that promotion.
Mhm.
Um, TNA in its heyday, if nothing else. And look, the TNA got a lot of things wrong, but some of the things that TNA got right was presentation, and they really, really sold you on the X division. And the X division was always they had the slogan, "It's not about weight limits, it's about no limits."
Mhm.
And they really did a good job in marketing that hybrid style that was kind of coming together on in Ring of Honor. So that was a big thing for them, and that was big on their branding. And so when you thought TNA, you thought X division, you thought six-sided ring, like off rip, you have a six-sided ring, you have an X division, and it's distinct in that way.
Mhm.
And that's something WWE did not do. And so when we talk about fighting homogenization, uh, presentation and direction is a big part of it. You have to find a way to sell and brand your product in a way that's not like the top promotions. Because if it is like the top promotions in presentation and in style, then what really is the incentive of watching your promotion? If in theory I can watch, in some cases, bigger stars and superior wrestlers in the major promotions. So
Mhm.
that's a big thing. Uniqueness is really the key to all of this. I just got done watching the Takuya Nomura and Fuminori Abe promoted Battle Arts show that they threw on. And for those that are unfamiliar, basically they did this last year and they did it again this year. It's kind of this like Battle Arts revival thing that they're doing, and they've been promoting the shows and putting them on in Shinjuku Face. And Battle Arts was a shoot style promotion in the 90s. And that was like right at the precipice and precursor to the MMA boom in Japan, which became all the rage and swept up their nation. But the truth of the matter is, in 2024 wrestling, the MMA influence on wrestling isn't nearly as heavy and strong, at least in the way that worked shoot wrestling looked, as it was in the 1990s in Japan. And because of that, Abe and Nomura with this show struck this really unique thing where the wrestling just looked very different. And it also has this really like unique tone because we know now that MMA is like a shoot and wrestling is a work. And so you can't put the toothpaste in the tube in that way. But what you have is a unique wrestling style that, again, is just different because there's almost this weird irreverence to how the shows looked because you're getting these situations where some guys are having like MMA gloves and other guys aren't, and some guys have boxing gloves and other guys don't, and it's
Mhm.
like really silly in that way. It's very wacky, but these guys are fighting each other despite having different styles, and there's just an element of silliness to that. But again, it's just a unique tone to it because it's kind of funny, but it's not like the DDT Japanese meme comedy either, and it's also
Mhm.
kind of gritty and it has that kind of like stiffness to it. So I say all that to say that was very distinct and unique. And if nothing else, it's different. And I know I just watched a show there that I will not see when I turn on RevPro, that I will not see when I turn on CMLO.
Mhm.
And so that's a big thing, man. It's like presentation, the color of the ropes, the just the colors of the show, the presentation, all that stuff, the styles. I think another thing that would help this is essentially it's up to the wrestlers of tomorrow to figure out what their lane is going to be,
Hmm.
because the wrestlers of today are influenced by the wrestling that has taken place over the last 15 to 20 years. And that's just going to be how it's going to be. What they grew up on is their influence, and what they saw is their influence. And so it's up to the next generation of wrestlers. It's going to be interesting to keep track of um, how they develop and what their leanings are stylistically. And we don't have a direct answer yet to what those are going to be, because who knows what a seven to 15-year-old wrestling fan growing up on the bloodline is going to wrestle like, you
Hmm.
know. Um, Whereas like a lot of wrestlers of today, they grew up watching AJ Styles, or going a little bit further back like a Rey Mysterio or someone like that.
Hmm.
It's just very different. So it's up to them to figure out what their lane is going to be. I can tell you this: um, you get something new when you mix two different things or multiple different things. And again, the 2000s hybrid style that you saw in Ring of Honor, that's just what you saw in Japan in the 90s mixed with Lucha Libre, and a couple other things. So that's something to take note of. And lastly, what I would say is what's old is new. And one thing to stand out that you could always do is look around at what everybody else is doing,
Hmm.
and then look to the past and say, and look at the old tricks and old stylings and old presentations that aren't being used commonly now, and just simply bring them back. It's not an uncommon thing to do, and it's done all the time in wrestling actually. I honestly think some promotions should just look at, like, for example, how territory American wrestling is presented, or even uh, excuse me, how New Japan was presented in the 90s in that kind of sports style fashion, or whatever it is. Like, you look around and you just go backwards and you're gonna find something that you're like, oh, that's really cool, that's really neat, and they don't do that now. And you can simply bring that back and it's gonna stand out. Daniel Garcia was part of a collective of really talented independent wrestlers that were technical wrestlers. And part of what made that group of guys refreshing, him and Moriarty and Yuta and Jonathan Gresham and a couple other guys that were really in a nice groove in 2020, 2021 on the indies, was that indie wrestling for the previous decade was kind of PWG pill, generally speaking. And so in 2020, 2021, when these guys are just kind of grappling and they're trading holds and doing a lot of like European style catch wrestling and counters like that, and you get a little bit of Yave with the lucha style technical wrestling and that kind of stuff, like, that stood out, and that was like refreshing at the time. And it was so well done that most of those guys got signed pretty quickly, so it couldn't really progress past that. But that's another thing. It's like those guys saw that technical wrestling wasn't the prevailing style of American wrestling anymore. The way it kind of really took on like the identity of the indies when Nigel and Bryan Danielson were like at the top. So what's old is new, and just try to do things that the major promotions aren't doing. And that's those things when it comes to presentation and just kind of borrowing from the past, you end up unintentionally creating new stuff out of that when you mix it with modern talent. And with that comes new ways to kind of approach wrestling. And it's going to take those types of things to be able to get different kinds of wrestling.
I really appreciate your perspective, Ibou, and I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate all the points you brought up too. I think a lot of them are very impactful and just lend a lot of credence to how wrestling is today. All your links are down below, of course. But is there anything else you'd like to promote right now?
Yeah, listen, follow me at Backup Hangman, of course, on Twitter. If you use Blue Sky, you can follow me and find me there at Backup Hangman. I will be watching and tweeting about wrestling or the Knicks or the Yankees. And if you want my silly, dumb little takes on wrestling, you guys can always find me there. And you can also catch me every week, every Monday on Wrestle Purist Worldwide at 6 p.m. on the Wrestle Purist channel on Mondays. And you can see me on the Raw Review Tuesdays every 2:30 on the Wrestle Purist channel.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, Ibou, once again. Please go check out those shows. They'll be linked down below. Check out Ibou on all kinds of socials. And yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I had fun here.
All right, before I close this out, I want to thank Ibou once again for coming on the channel. For my first ever guest in a video, it truly doesn't get better than him. So please show your support and drop those follows through all the links down below. I wanted to bring Ibou on because he inspired this video, and also because he fucking rules, but also because I knew he'd be best suited to give out some ways we can improve on things. And I'm happy to report that he very much did, because I simply agree with all of his points. I co-sign his points on uniqueness, taking from the past, individuality, and all the rest. And by the end, I did feel more positive about the future, now with those defined pathways for improvement out there. And I hope you all do too, because at the end of the day, I do think that eventually things will get better. I think wrestling is still adjusting to a world with two major US companies, and in time, things will sort themselves out better and better. And while I know it seems difficult to think anything else but it's over a lot of the time, the solutions are there. The pathway for betterment of the wrestling world is there, and I believe we'll eventually start walking those paths. At least, I hope we do, because at the end of the day, after all of what we said, after all the things we've covered here, I want you to take away this: pro wrestling fucking rules. I love it with all of my heart, and I really want it, most of all, to be the best that it can possibly be. Now, with that being said, that's gonna do it for the video, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope what I was getting at comes across in this video, and I hope you decide to like this video. And also, of course, make sure to subscribe to the channel, where no matter what, we're always talking graps. And also, one more thing, please make sure to support Ibou through all of the links down in the description box. He's so awesome. We've done plenty of shows together on Late Night Grin, and I once again really appreciate him coming on to talk graps with us. Now, with all of that said, thank you guys so much for watching. It's been Novi. Much love to each and every one of you. Peace.